Hello, welcome to Homeschool Life. My name is Bobby, and this video is called Accounting Invoices Part 2. In this video, we are going to be looking at filtering invoices, printing invoices from the invoice listing, and downloading. We will also take a look at how to edit invoices and delete them. In order to do this, we need to be logged into the admin website. From the admin homepage, we can access the accounting tool in one of two ways, by clicking here or here. When we enter the accounting tool, we are on the accounts receivable listing. We need to be in the invoices listing, so we will click here on invoices. The first thing I do want to mention when you're on the invoice listing is you'll want to check your fiscal year filter. That's located here. The fiscal year will default to the current fiscal year unless you've been in here previously and have changed it. It will maintain what you've changed it to. But this fiscal year is determined by what you have set up in accounting settings. I'll pop over there real quick and show you. Here's the fiscal year that's set up for this group, January the 1st. So when they're looking at their invoices or their payments or adjustments, it is the same in all three, and the fiscal year is current, that means that any invoices that are dated January 1st or later will be considered current fiscal year. Invoices that are generated prior to January 1st would be in the prior fiscal year. So if I wanted to do a search of all of my invoices from this year and in the past, I could change this fiscal year filter to all, and then it would generate my listing here of all of my invoices that date back to whenever I started using the accounting tool, which in this case would be in 2019. So you can see all these invoices are old. They go back quite a ways. Okay, change this back to my current fiscal year. And we'll take a look at some other things you can do from the invoice listing. The first thing that I want to show you is how to filter your invoices. So this listing contains all of your invoices that you've created, but there might be a time when you want to go in and you want to quickly determine, for example, what invoices have been generated for a certain category, for a certain date, for a certain teacher, for certain classes. So the filters option located here will give you the ability to filter your invoice listing by any number of criteria. For example, maybe you want to do a filter by a specific teacher account if you have accounts for your teachers set up. So we can drop down here and maybe we want to know all of the classes or all of the invoices that have been generated for Barbara Gordon's classes. We'd pick that one, apply the filter, and then you'll notice now as we scroll down, all of these invoices are for Barbara Gordon's classes. You're not limited to one filtering criteria. You can also, maybe you want to know all of Barbara Gordon's classes that are not paid, because the paid status would be no. So you can again click on the apply filter here, and now it brings up a list of only those classes for Barbara Gordon that have not been paid at this point. Anytime that you have run a filter and you want to start something completely different and unrelated, you would want to click on the remove filters icon, and that will take you back to your initial listing so that you can see all of your invoices and now perhaps set up some new criteria. Another thing you might want to do, say you do a filter, let's say you want to know all of your invoices that were due on a certain date that have not yet been paid. So we would say the due date equals, let's say, I know there's some that were due on September the 4th, and maybe they were not paid yet. We'll click on no, apply my filter, and it brings me up a list of all of the invoices that were due. Notice the due dates are all 9/4, and they're none of them paid. You might be wondering, why are they in red? Well, that's because they are unpaid and they're past due. Anytime an invoice is past due, it will be shown in red. It's just a quick way for you to see that this is actually overdue for payment. Now, once I've run that report, maybe I want to print it. It gives me a total down here. So I know quickly at a glance that I have $1,200 of invoices that were due on the 4th of September that were not paid. So I could easily run a report by clicking on this printer icon. And then it would give me the option. It would show me a preview here, of course, and then it would give me the option to either print it to a PDF file or maybe to actually print it. There is one final thing you might want to do from this filtered invoice listing. Again, we're still looking at invoices that were due on September 4th that were unpaid, is you may want to download this into Excel. To do that, from that listing, we would click on this icon here, and then I would open it. And once this is in Excel, of course, I can do any number of things with it. I could sort it maybe by the member's last name. And now I have that same listing of invoices due on September the 4th that were unpaid, and I now have it sorted alphabetically by the member's last name. Really, when you get into Excel, you can do anything with that spreadsheet that you wish to do. So it's kind of nice to be able to download your filtered invoice listings because then you have a lot of options. So I'm going to close that out and return. Here we are back on the invoices listing. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now and take a look at the invoice listing for a particular family. We do that by returning to accounts receivable listing and then selecting a particular family. Let's take a look at the Jorgensen family. So we follow that across to this dollar icon in the statement column and we click on that. This takes us to a listing of their outstanding balances. We can scroll down and see what all those are. But if we want to take a look at all of their invoices and all of their payments and adjustments, we click on this tab, Invoice and Payment Details, and that takes us to that listing. My fiscal year is set at all because I had previously selected all. And now that I'm on this listing, I can see all of their invoices, and as I scroll down, their payments and their adjustments. So there's a couple things I want to point out about this invoice listing. The first thing is you can see all of the same information that you see from the main accounting invoice listing, except for it's all for one particular family. You can see the accounts here. These are the teacher accounts. You have your invoice dates and their due dates, their descriptions, and then you have the paid status in the column here, as well as the amount of the invoices. Now, one thing we did not talk about on the accounting invoice listing is a paid status of NA. You might be thinking, how could it be NA? It either is or isn't paid. Well, there's actually 4 things that might appear in the paid status. Obviously, yes and no are the 2 main ones. ADJ is another one you might see. That indicates that this payment or this invoice has been closed for payment because of an adjustment. It's like a credit. And if you scroll down here, you can see those associated adjustments that closed out that invoice. So that cancellation occurred before the member had paid that invoice. So the system just closes the invoice for payment and marks it ADJ. But there's another status that you see here, which is NA, and that means not applicable. And the reason that it's not applicable is because the accounting category for this invoice is CR, which is class registration, and this is in a partial payment accounting category. I'm not going to go into great detail about what that means. I do that in a different video called Accounting Introduction, and if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend that you do. But the partial payment accounting category allows members to pay partial payments against their invoice totals instead of to specific invoices. So what that means is if you have 5 invoices that are CR invoices, the total of those invoices might be $100. When you make a payment, the payment does not apply to any specific invoice. Instead, it applies to that overall balance of $100 in that CR category. So that's why if you use the CR category, and many groups do not use it, so this may not even apply, but if your group does use the CR category, you will always see an NA status in the paid column for an invoice. This will appear both on the member invoice listing and on the invoice listing in accounting invoices. Let's take a look now at a few other things you can do from the members invoice and payment detail listing. If you'll recall from the overall accounting system invoice listing, we have the capability to put in some filters. We also have that same ability from within the members invoice and payment detail. That icon is located here. If I click on it, I have the same option, filtering criteria options that I had from the invoices listing we looked at before. Let's say I want to find, quickly locate all of the invoices that have world literature in the description. I can type that in here, and I can actually just type world lit because that is contained within the words world literature. When I'm finished, I can apply the filter. And as you can see, quickly, the system returns to me a list of all the invoices with world literature in the description. If you scroll down, you'll also notice it returns to me any payments and adjustments that have world literature in the description. So this is a very handy tool when you're trying to look for specific things for a specific member. The filtering options can be combined like we did before. Again, you would click on, I'm going to remove filters first, and then click on filter. I could go by any number of different things here. I could have a date is equal to or even greater than or less than a certain date. I could have a due date equals a certain date, so I could filter by all invoices that are due on a certain date. I could combine them, as I mentioned, with a certain due date and a certain teacher account. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility from within a specific member account to research specific things about invoices. So I'm going to exit out of that. Now, the other thing you can do from within this invoice and payment detail listing is send an email to the family by clicking on this icon. And you can also print a list of all of their invoices, payments, and adjustments by clicking on this printer icon. And it will do the same thing it did before. It shows you all of their information, and you have the option here of either printing it or perhaps saving it to a PDF if you'd rather do that. The next thing I'd like to show you is how you can edit invoices and what fields within an invoice record can be changed. That depends somewhat on the accounting category of the invoice. For example, let's take a look at this invoice here, which is in a partial payment category. We talked about that earlier. This is a CR, class registration invoice, that this group has set up for partial payment. The paid status, as you'll recall, was NA. So in a partial payment category, an invoice can be changed in many ways. To actually make that change, you would click on the invoice number, which is in blue, next to the invoice. Then you would actually have a display of that particular invoice, and any of the fields where you see your drop downs and you see the text entry boxes, any of those can be changed. For example, in this case, maybe the group decided to lower the price of this class from $400 to $350. I'd like to make a note here that if you change the cost of a class in your class setup after invoices have already been generated, those invoices will not be changed in the accounting system. That would have to be done manually. Those people who sign up after you make the change in class setup, of course, the invoices would generate correctly with the new amount, but the ones that have already generated would not reflect the price change. So in this case, let's assume this group changed the price of this driver's ed class from $400 to $350. I can just make that change. I have the option to email the family or not, and when I'm finished, I just click on Update Invoice. And you'll notice when we go back to the invoice and payment detail listing, the amount of that invoice has been changed from $400 to $350. Again, that was on a partial payment invoice. Now let's take a look at invoices that are not in the partial payment categories. And in this case, what you can change on an invoice is determined by whether it's paid or unpaid, or even if it's been adjusted. So let's take a look first of all at what you can change on an unpaid invoice. So this is an invoice that you can change. You can look at your paid status here. Again, to access that invoice, you would click on the invoice number in blue. And from within these field selections, you can see that you can change every field. You can change the category, you can change the account, the date, the due date, the description. Maybe you want to add something to the end of the description. Maybe you want to come in and add some administrative notes that are seen only by an admin user. Maybe you might want to change the amount. Again, this is an unpaid invoice. So in this case, let's change the category. Let's say this was for PE group dues. And after we set up a few of these invoices, we decided we wanted to have a particular accounting category assigned for PE group dues. So we could come in, drop down our category menu, and find our new category that we set up for adjustments, or not adjustments, but rather for categories, and click on the PE group, come down, update the invoice, and we've now made that change to that invoice. You can now see that the invoice prefix is PE rather than it used to be SC for South Cell. So that was an unpaid invoice. Now let's take a look at what you can do on a paid or adjusted invoice. These are examples of adjusted. Here's a bunch of them that are paid. So let's take a look at one of these paid invoices and see what we can change here. You'll notice here that you cannot change the category, you cannot change the account, and you cannot change the amount. Keep in mind the invoice has already been paid, so you wouldn't want someone to come in and change the amount of an invoice that has already been paid. So you're limited here on what you can change. If you wanted to make a change to the end of the description, you could place your cursor in that field and you could just add something to the end of the description. Or maybe you want to add some admin notes. You could do that here as well. There really isn't anything I want to change on this invoice, so I'm just going to exit out. The same is true of invoices that have been adjusted. These three invoices, if you'll recall, have been closed with these three adjustments, and so you are limited in what you can change on an adjusted invoice. You look at that by clicking here on this invoice number, and you'll notice that these are the same fields that you can change on a paid invoice. You can change the date, the due date, the description, and the admin notes, but that's all you can change because the invoice has already been closed for payment, so you are limited in what you can change. Of course, we're still on the specific member invoice and payment detail for the Jorgensen family. The way that you would do this from the overall invoices listing is exactly the same. So if you were looking at the invoices for all of your members, you would have the same abilities to change those invoices from the main invoice listing. You would just pick whichever invoice you want and then click on the invoice number, access it, and depending on whether it's paid, unpaid, or adjusted, you would change it and then update at the end. Since we're now on the overall invoice listing for the entire group, let's take a look at deleting invoices. You'll notice on this listing that some of these invoices have trash can icons next to them, but other ones do not. This is because from the main accounting invoices listing, you cannot delete paid or adjusted invoices. There is no icon even available to do that. See if there's any others in here. As you can see, these are adjusted. No trash can icon is there. These are adjusted. No trash can icon is there. This one is paid. No trash can icon is there. So that's something to note. If you really did want to delete one of those invoices, you just really felt like you should, you can go to the specific member account and you can delete from there. So let's return to the member account for this West family here. So we would go back to the accounts receivable listing, scroll down to the West family, click on the $ here, and then click on invoice and payment details. I want to call your attention to one thing here, and that is that the West family currently has a 0 balance, which means that they have no open invoices at all. Everything's paid for or adjusted, and I'll explain why I pointed that out here in just a moment. So from within this family invoice and payment detail listing, you'll see that there is an icon for this paid invoice. If you'll recall, when we were on the main invoices listing, there was no ability to delete. So you can delete paid invoices from within the family's specific account. I would caution you in every case that you consider deleting an invoice that it must be done cautiously and rarely. When you delete invoices, especially if they're already paid, you can cause some discrepancies on your member accounts that are really hard to find later on. So I will show you how you can delete an invoice, and then I'll show you why you need to be careful doing it. So to delete one, obviously you're going to click on the little trash can icon here. Notice it's a paid invoice, so I'm going to delete this paid invoice. So it says, are you sure you want to do this? And I say, okay. So it tells me that it's been successfully deleted, and you'll notice that it's not there anymore. But take a look now at what happened when I refresh my screen. Take a look at what happened to the member's balance now. Now we show a $5 credit on the account. And so you're going, why did that happen? Well, here's what happened. The invoice had been paid. So there is a payment record out here for that invoice. That is this payment record right here. But you'll notice what happened now was there's an invoice icon that's missing. On full payment accounting categories, when you issue a payment, there will always be an invoice icon attached to that payment, which shows which invoice or which group of invoices were paid. Well, we deleted the invoice that went along with this payment, so now the icon's gone. So what happened was we now have a payment that was originally attached to an invoice, but now the invoice is gone. So now we have made an extra $5 payment, or there's an extra $5 payment on this account, which results in a $5 credit. Now, that was really easy to spot on this account. If I came in here and I said, oh, I've got a $5 credit on this account, I wonder why, this would be pretty easy to spot because there's not very many invoices, there's not very many payments, and there's not very many adjustments. But when you have a dozen or dozens of payments and invoices and adjustments, and you're off by $5 or you're off by $500, it can be very hard to find that if you've been deleting invoices that no longer have associated payments with them. And the real trick would be if you deleted one that was affiliated with multiple invoices. I think this one might be a good example. Here we have 2 invoices that were paid with this one payment for $200. So if I were to go out and delete one of those invoices, so let's delete one of those chemistry invoices. I'm going to delete this one. And then when I refresh my screen, you'll see that now my balance is a $105 credit. And that's not so easy to spot because you see, this is the payment we're talking about here. It originally had 2 invoices attached to it, but we deleted one of them. So now if I'm just looking at this, I show that there's an invoice icon. So I would not be able to say right away that the reason I'm off by $100 on this account is because there's a missing payment or there's a missing invoice record. Only by clicking on every single invoice icon here and comparing the payments would I be able to tell that this invoice was a $100 invoice and it was a $100 payment. So that one would check out. But if I went back and I looked at this invoice icon, remember this is a $200 payment, but if I click on it, oh, I've got a problem here because there's only $100 worth of invoices showing for a $200 payment. So I knew where to go to look for this, so I found this rather quickly. But if you had dozens and dozens of invoices, payments, and adjustments, this could take a while to find the mistake. So again, when we deleted that paid invoice, we caused the account to be completely out of balance because now we have a $200 payment, but only $100 worth of invoices associated with that payment. So I point all that out merely to remind you to be very, very careful deleting invoices. I would really rather people not delete invoices because it does change the history on the account. If there was an invoice created, then there's something happened that caused that invoice to be created, especially if it's a class registration invoice or a member registration invoice that are automatically generated by the system. So if you start deleting them, you've lost the history of what happened on the account. Now, the time when it might be helpful is if you manually create an invoice and maybe you created it for the wrong member. So you would say, oh, I better delete that from the member account where it doesn't actually apply. So you can delete them, but again, we ask you to exercise caution in doing so. That takes care of this video. We've talked about how to view and research your invoices using the filtering option, how to print them, how to download them, how to email a list of them to your members. We looked at editing invoices when you can and cannot edit them. And we've also taken a quick look at how to delete invoices. If you have any questions on this or any other topic, I would encourage you to visit the Help Center. We have a variety of videos available on various topics. And if you still have questions and you need our assistance, visit the admin homepage and fill out a ticket, and we would be happy to assist you. This concludes the Accounting Invoices Part 2 video. Thank you for watching.